this is the 79 Trans Am, and if you guys aren't familiar with this car, be sure to go back and watch part 1 where I introduced this vehicle and you could hear all about it. Today we're going to be looking at getting this 403 out of here. I have pretty much everything disconnected already. Fuel system, the ignition distributor's out, the transmission has been disconnected from it for a while, because if some of you remember from the previous video with this Trans Am, I suspect it has balancing issues. It looks like the flex plate was changed and it's not the right one for the car, and this engine was balanced years ago in the 80s, looking at the receipts. So somebody updated that flex plate. It is not balanced anymore, and I have a feeling that that is why it shakes so much when it's running. So I disconnected that transmission a long time ago just to check out the flex plate. The only thing left holding the engine in at this point are the engine mounts. So once I loosen those up, we'll get the hoist hooked up and we'll yank that girl out of there. Alright, so now I just gotta roll her back and give myself some room to get the hoist on in here, and we can get going. Don't worry, we'll get you sorted out. Poor girl's been mistreated. Take care of you. Alright, so engine mount bolts are out. Hoist is all hooked up. I think everything's free. We'll find out in a second. So let's start getting her up. Let's tilt the adjuster forward a bit. Running out of hoist. Well, now this might be a problem. What she said. So the engine is completely out, and now it is safely on that dolly, tucked away for right now because it is pretty late. I don't know if you guys could hear it. It's kind of sleeting, I guess. So it's late, it's cold. That thing makes a lot of noise, and I'm not going to push everything around since it's so late. We got to get that engine over to the garage at the other property. So I'm going to call it a night, go inside, have a drink, put my feet up, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Well, it may not look much like it, but it is the next day. Sun's down, it's late, it's even colder than yesterday. So let's back the truck in and start getting this engine over. The garage, and I got the other hoist here. That one's not as big as the other one, so it doesn't quite have the reach, but fortunately looks like I'm just gonna be able to drag that on that way, get it up, get the truck out of the way, and get that out of there. There she goes. There we go. Ooh, cool it. Alright. I'll work with the old brain here a little bit. Set my muscles. That got a little sketchy. Perfect. Alright, so I got the engine stand bracket mounted on the back here. Just go ahead and torque that up real quick. Click. 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 There we go. Okay. Alright. Time to hang the stand on it. Little trick. Make sure you always lube these up nice and good before you go sliding the engine on. Okay, and we'll just drop the pin in. Boop. Alright. That's clear, that's clear. Now is when we pucker up, waiting for the bolts to crack. Stress check. guys, here she is. The 403 is out and it's mounted up to the engine stand. Nice and cozy in the garage now, finally. Now, I think that this thing has seen some things. As I said, I have receipts from way back, 81, 82, something like that, that showed that this thing was at a machine shop. It showed balancing, head work, cam and lifter kit, and apparently some other goodies that are in there, which we'll get to. But I heard from a previous owner that this thing put out over 400 horsepower back in the day. But unfortunately, somewhere along the line, more so recently, I think somebody who wasn't too familiar with these engines had their hands on it and just didn't quite realize that something was off, because that balance seems like it was upset, and I think somebody was still beating on it, because while this thing was running, you were able to hear some bearing noise. So I think it's been out of balance for so long that it's been starting to wear out the bearings quite a bit and introducing a bit of slop. And I mean, with how bad it felt, just a few rips with this thing, probably enough to do that. But we got it out finally. We're gonna take care of her, whatever she needs, and we're gonna get that car going back down the road, looking as pretty and sounding as good as she should. So we'll get up in here and take a close look at everything real quick. Holley Street Dominator intake manifold. Not a lot of these left. Probably not very popular now, as pretty much everything performance has a dual plane intake on it. This is a single plane, and it's got a dual pattern carb flange, so you can slap a Holley on here or run a quadrajet, whatever tickles your fancy. And it looks like we had some leaking intake manifold bolts, if I were to just guess. These valve covers, pretty nice. Up here you might notice this is one of those spacers / adapters for one of those flex take off your face fans. And this was actually in between the water pump pulley and the original mechanical clutch style fan. Why? Not for any good reason. It was actually being used as a spacer to shove that mechanical fan further into the fan shroud that was on the radiator, because that fan shroud was cut up so much that it stuck out of the radiator probably about that much. I think when somebody shimmed the body mounts on the car, probably lowered everything, and then it was hitting the fan. So somebody just cut the crap out of it. And I guess they used this trying to shove it in there. It must not have been cooling well, because in addition to all that, there was an electric fan shoved in front of the radiator, pushing air through it. So all this is going to get thrown in the garbage. And I got a new fan shroud, actually an original fan shroud, that's going to be going back on here. And that should take care of that, because I'm tired of looking at that. Moving on along. If we take a look down here, you can see this is actually a Ken Bell, however you'd like to pronounce it, crank pulley here. And this was on one of the receipts that I was talking about from the early 80s. So it's really wild to see that that thing is still on here. Behind that, got an aftermarket balancer. And I think I remember seeing somewhere in the receipts something about this front cover being replaced as well. So it's kind of dirty. A little hard to tell now, but we'll get into that. What else do we got? Big 7, little A heads. So this, I believe, Early's Olds small block heads, maybe 68 to 70-ish. Smaller combustion chambers. I think they had bigger valves. I'm used to Chevy stuff, so you guys are just going to have to bear with me a little bit here on this one. But this was definitely a big compression bump and performance bump. So these are nice to have on here. And I believe they've been gone through as well, judging from the receipts. So again, very good to have, and can't wait to see what else is in there. You can see here, the oil fill tube was actually blocked off. And that's why a lot of people were thinking, just from a quick look at a distance, that this was not an Olds motor, because that fill tube is usually the telltale sign of it being a 403. I don't know if it was the guy just didn't like looking at it or wanted it to look like a 400 or what the deal was, but she's a 403. And if you still don't believe me at this point, you can go ahead and look that up. But she's a 403. And the last interesting piece that I think we're going to be able to see from out here has to do with the crank. Let me take a look under here. When I was trying to figure out what the balancing issue was, I pulled the flex plate off and I was looking at the crank flange here, and I noticed this notch. And I had been looking at 403 cranks and saw that the flange did not look like that. So that led me to doing some further research, and it turns out that there is an Olds 330 crank in here, and those came from the factory forged. So somebody was trying to put some power out of this thing. So that's also going to be pretty interesting to see when we get to that. I actually called several machine shops to talk to them about that, and there were some guys probably my age working in there that had no idea about that until I finally found the machine shop that I deal with now, and he sounded pretty surprised when he heard about that. Said he hadn't seen it in a while. So it seems like this old gal here has been sealed up for quite some time, and a bit of a time capsule with some of the parts on here between the intake and that crank pulley and the crank itself. It seems like a old school 403 build, and I think it's really cool. And I'm extremely excited to tear into this and actually see what's in here. Again, as I said, I'm a Chevy guy, and I know some of the things on these Oldsmobile engines are a little different. So I got to do some research and read the couple of books that I got before I really start digging into it, just so I know. You know, you get down to it, pushrod engine is a pushrod engine, but I'd like to know all the little things that Oldsmobile did. And from a couple of things that I've seen so far, it's a combination of excitement and fear. So we'll get to that. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. There's going to be more on this. I'll take you guys along as I tear this down and we see what's in there. Aside from that, this thing is running again, and I've taken it for a couple drives, and she rips with those new gears and that new engine setup that I have in there, along with the higher stall converter in the transmission. This thing roasts those tires, and she sounds so good and has just been running really well. So some more videos will come with her as we button her up and go for some drives. But other than that, guys, as usual, stay tuned for the Camaro and the Trans Am. I'll keep you guys updated with what goes on with them. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a good one.